So over time, feelings that would have feelings, emotions, sensations that would have initially felt very ego dystonic outside the self will start becoming much more ego syntonic, or at least appear to be that way. Now, what ego syntonic means is acceptable to the self, in line with the self. That seems more like quote unquote you. Now, what that means is that the entity in question or the spirit in question is already, or spirits or entities, multiple, plural, um, that they will start breaking down your energy, your energetic walls, your aura, in order to be able to more easily manipulate it, to generate energy, to breach it to the point where they can potentially overtake you. And indeed, likely what will happen later on is that one or more of the household members will become oppressed to partially possess at times until they either move out or until one of them gets overtaken, in which case it may become a personal attachment or haunting, which is possible, but more on that later. So basically, the goal of these entities in such a case will be to tear one down, to break one down, to facilitate their feeding, to facilitate their goals, whatever those may be. So usually, what will also happen is that fights, as a result of the being influenced in your emotions, as a result of having your mind and cognitive function being influenced, what will happen is that this, of course, generates energy. It will feed the spirit. The spirit will become stronger. And as a result, the spirit may be able to manifest more fully and more thoroughly. Now, what that also means, of course, is that you will start to see the classical poltergeist activity, the classic poltergeist haunting kind of style stuff, where dishes may be flown across the room, objects may be going missing and then relocating itself, or they may reappear in the same location a day later or a certain time period later. You may find foreign objects in your house, although a lot of the time, if you, for example, find foreign objects in your house, there may also be a sign of a curse going on that particular property or on you, perhaps, and you just happen to, move into that. But these are all very complicated issues that I have no way of specifically outlining in a video that is meant to generally or or address the topic of hauntings in a more generalized manner. But you will see that you will start hearing the classical bump in the night kind of thing, where windows and doors will get knocked on, doorknobs may start wiggling and turning, and all that sort of shit that basically goes on in what you see in horror movies and in ghost shows and all that kind of stuff. Um, and what may also happen is that your pets, if you have any, may start getting riled up, that they may start acting scared, that they may start acting strangely. What that means is that the entities in the house are basically fighting a psychological war against you in order to try to tear you down, in order to break your will further and further. They first seek to break up the family unit in this case, and again, this is more so the case with, of course, negative hauntings, because a benign haunting will try to get your attention. It will try to lead you to certain places if they want your help with something, so that you perhaps make a discovery of whatever nature, or perhaps if there is no such physical evidence remaining, they will simply want to get your attention to let you know, hey, I'm here, which may have overlap in some of these things that I just mentioned. I mean, a spirit that is very desperate for attention or very desperate for help may start throwing shit around, which is not a good idea, but they may be very overly emotional and confused and lost. Now, the difference here is usually you can, if you have a somewhat honed intuition, a somewhat honed empathy, you can probably tell the difference between the intent. Now, if you feel malice, if they're actively undermining your sleep, if they're actively starting fights in your family, if they're basically, if everything starts to degrade the moment that you move in or shortly after, and by shortly, we're talking about a time span from days to months, usually no later than a year, but I have heard of cases where it can take that long for the entities to, start acting up. And in those cases, the entity is actually quite smart because in that case, you would probably not be so quick to suspect that a haunting is taking place. Why? Because you lived there for a year and nothing happened, you know? So those are all things that they may play with. It is basically psychological warfare. And indeed, that is what a lot of hauntings are meant to do. They're meant to break you down, to generate distress, to break up the family, to make sure that you no longer have each other to rely on, divide and conquer, if you will. And then they can start picking on individual people, and everybody will feel isolated and sad and afraid and lonely and lost and depressed and angry. And a lot of negative energy is, of course, generated in an environment like that. And the more isolated you become, the more vulnerable you become because other people, there is strength in numbers. So, these are all things that you may find. You will find, perhaps even in the early stages, that there are cold spots. Again, the feeling of being watched is going to become stronger the longer it goes on. You may even start seeing physical manifestations of spirits. You may have dreams that are very frightening, that may depict certain scenarios that are fucked up, particularly if the same kind of spirit keeps appearing in it, particularly if the spirit keeps looking the same or roughly the same. Particularly if there is a theme to the dreams that you keep having and you never had those dreams before you moved in, by the way. That is one important thing there because if you had those kinds of dreams before you moved in, we are probably not talking about a location haunting. It's probably something that's more personal than just that. So there will be a heaviness and a stagnation in the air. It's often also felt in the earlier stages, but the more that things go on, the more negative energy that is generated, the heavier that this will, of course, become, the more prominent that this will become. It is likely that you will have feelings of things being hard to breathe in the house. It may seem the moment that you walk in there, and this may happen to your friends, it may happen to your family, that the moment you walk into that door, the energy seems to just get sucked right out of you. If you go out with your family and friends and you feel way better after being out of the house for about an hour or two, you go back to your house and all of a sudden you have these negative feelings and emotions again, then there is likely a cause for there being a malicious haunting at play or a haunting that is quote unquote benign, but that has dealt with a lot of negative, um, you know, associations basically, such as a murder, a rape, etc., etc. And as I said, such feelings they will likely pass a short while or even immediately after leaving the premise. That is another surefire way where you can tell that there's something not quite right with that house. It is very important to note that escalation oftentimes happens in stages. It is not the case usually that, as I mentioned earlier, that you will immediately have objects being thrown around, go missing, etc. You will not immediately start hearing disembodied voices, usually, although it is possible. I have heard of it. And it is just important to keep track of that. If you suspect that your place may be haunted, start observing. And one warning, if you do start paying more attention to it, it may be likely that the spirit will or spirits may start targeting you, which is why I suggest that if you are watching this video and you suspect that there is something of this nature going on, that before you do anything about it, that you wait until my next video on this particular topic before you start doing anything about it. Because just tangling with these spirits can cause great, great harm. And that brings me to the final stages of a haunting in a location, which will likely be pretty much time for you to leave or to take drastic measures. Now, if you do not have the capabilities, willpower, and or desire, and or funds or family cohesion at that point anymore to take drastic action, I recommend that you leave as soon as possible. However, I am personally an advocate for standing my ground in most things, as befits the kind of path that I walk. But I understand that there are people who perhaps have never, experienced anything like this before, who do not have experience with magic, perhaps have turned to their local churches and they got rejected for whatever reason, which is a story that you, strangely enough, hear a lot. Um, or where they consulted their churches or their religious institution, and they did perhaps a quote unquote blessing or something along those lines, or they decided to cleanse their house and stuff became worse. This is very normal because blessings and cleansings and stuff like that, they don't do jack shit, to put it frankly. It will cleanse negative energy. Yes, smudging will do that. Blessings will do that if the appropriate will and application of will and energy is utilized. Yes, this is true. However, what it merely does is make the energy neutral. It makes it not very palatable for negative spirits to reside there. It's basically a nullifier, a neutralizer. That is what white sage does. Even from a scientific perspective, it kills bacteria. It kills, negative things. White sage, when you burn it, the smoke of it is antibacterial. And, so these are things that may initially seem to improve the situation. But you will often hear that it will come back with a vengeance, the haunting does. Why? Because all you've managed to do is piss off the spirit or spirits, and they will likely either get reinforcements or they will just become so pissed that you have disrupted their feeding that they will start acting out, and that's usually when the haunting will escalate to physically dangerous proportions. Now, this may also be the case if things go on long enough, but one of the final stages of hauntings will be that you, your friends, your family, whoever you live with, your pets may become sick. They may become physically assaulted, scratched, hacked, cut, bitten, um, stuff like that. And you will to death, whether that is of your pets. Usually, that will be your pets first and then you. The reason for that is that your pets will generally have less protection against such energetic poisoning as will be going on in a malicious haunting. Um, the reason for that is because their body mass is usually smaller than ours, which means that our body mass, because it is larger, can handle more toxins in it, energetic toxins, which means that we are also more resilient to such poisoning. We also have cognitive functions and physical equipment such as thumbs that allow us to utilize tools and other things, and speech and all these kinds of things that we can utilize in magic, whether we realize it or not, to help us combat such issues. And of course, we also have secular sources to turn to in terms of psychologists, in terms of psychiatrists, in terms of medical professionals if there are issues with our health. But what you will usually see is even if you get treatment for your physical issues or your mental issues, as long as you remain in that house, they will either keep getting worse or they will keep getting fed because the spirits in question are funneling energy to those particular areas. They will seek to poison you, they will seek to break you down. First, they will wear you down mentally because your mental, your will, that is where your energetic, magical capabilities lay. The moment that that gets broken down, they can now start affecting your physical health, your physical well being more thoroughly, more eagerly, more, well, much more in depth, I suppose, is the word I'm looking for. And that is when things become a little dangerous or potentially fatal. So it is not meant to scare you that I say this. It is merely to say that that is something that you can eventually encounter. And that is why I always recommend that people who are dealing with this kind of thing, that they empower themselves through magic. I am actually not a strong proponent of consulting your local religious authorities because it is my experience that 9 times out of 10 they don't really do anything about it. And another thing that you have to keep in mind, an exorcism as is performed by the Catholic Church, for example, whether that is on a house or whether it is on a piece of property or whether that is on a person, because yes, a piece of property can be exorcised. Um, that the priest goes in armed with his will, or well, yeah, his will. Basically, the guy will go in with his faith, translation, his will, and he will utilize the power of his God, Yah, whatever, the Holy Spirit, quote unquote, and basically it's going to, be a battle of wills between the entity that is in the house and the priest. And usually, what you will see is that an exorcism will have multiple people partaking in it that are restraining the particular individual. And basically, they are collectively, with their collective will, forcing out the. But the premise, of course, of an exorcism is using litanies is verbal magic. It is vocal magic. You are reciting incantations. You are reciting verses that in your mind hold power. There are symbolisms to manifest your will. That is how magic works. You are having your Bible, it's your holy book, right? So you put faith in it. Again, translation, your will is focused in, on, and through it. And that is, again, magic. I use runes. Runes, to me, as a Germanic shaman, hold power because they represent the ancestral connection that we have to our gods. Therefore, when I utilize runes in my magic, they hold power to me. If I draw a Fehu, which is the rune of cattle, which back in the day, before the invention of money in that area of the world, meant wealth, then I am invoking energies of wealth. It is my will that I exert wealth and that I bring it into my reality. So when a priest does an exorcism, it is basically a manifestation of their will to get the spirit out of that person. Now, the problem with exorcisms is that you are forcing a spirit out in a very reckless manner. And I will again address this more fully later on. Suffice to say that I do not recommend that you do this. The reason for this is that it may permanently damage a person's energetic field. It will potentially leave holes, and you have to understand energy a bit more for this. And I cannot really cover this in this video because it's already very long. But basically, a person is made up of chakras, of energy nodes, of energy fields. They have your physical body, your astral body, your spiritual body. The Hindus, and I firmly believe that they are correct in this because I think the Hindus are very spot on when it comes to the way that energy flows and works, and that it is utilized, combined with the energetic practices of qigong and stuff like that, of reiki and all those things. The energy flow between nodes and the person is made up of several different energetic bodies that on different planes of existence are with that person at all times. And if a spirit decides to lodge itself in one of those bodies, it is, if you force it out recklessly like that, instead of carefully extracting and separating, then you have the potential to potentially permanently maim somebody on an energetic level, which is why, ironically, the Catholic Church says that when you have an exorcism, you will forever remain vulnerable. They know this, but for some reason they don't seem to address this. They don't change their methods, and I have to question why. Because they know this. They tell people that it requires a person to quote unquote remain close to God. Now, I have my personal theories, which again I will outline in another video, and please do watch that if you are interested in the topic of exorcism, as I for the longest time was, until I learned how to, combat entities in a more thorough manner in line with much more ancient shamanic traditions that do not provide the risk of permanent energy damage or damage to your mind, your spiritual well-being, etc. Because what it does, it takes a much longer time, yes, because it carefully untangles all the roots and the links and the ensnaring and all this stuff that the spirit puts in you as well, what I refer to as energetic hooks or links or attachments, in order to facilitate a proper, healthy, and safe removal, after which the spirit can be captured potentially and bound in various ways. So this is something that you need to be aware of. I do not recommend unless the situation is really, really urgent and the person is really in need of an immediate intervention of a spiritual nature, that you go to the religious authorities in that sense. What I recommend instead is that you learn how to empower yourself and everybody else around you. Now, it may seem that you may meet resistance. If you are someone with an Abrahamic background, you may have a very strong aversion to the idea of the occult, of magic, because you have been told that it is evil. Now, of course, if you are still watching this video this far in, after knowing who I am and what my ideas and beliefs and stances are on things and what my practices are, then, well, I have to first applaud you, but B, I also have to wonder, why would you not be open to giving this route a try? Because magic, the purpose of magic is not to invoke demons, quote unquote, although, unless, of course, if you refer to the old pagan gods who have been identified by the Abrahamic religions as demons, you know, as demons, then okay. But it is my understanding that most people who work with magic in that sense, they don't see the demons that they call on as demons. So themselves of that persuasion. I am personally not one of them. I am not someone who works with those kinds of beings. I do not find them to resonate with me in that sense. But I do recognize that a lot of beings who are called demons are, like I said, just pagan gods that I have no problem working with. So basically, what I would recommend is that you empower yourself, that you study magic, that you start meditating. And please, for the love of the gods, don't mess around with Ouija boards until you know what you're doing. Because if you are already in a house where there are so many spirits, and none of them, or very few of them, are positive, and you're going to utilize such a portal opening tool to the spirit realm, and you start asking stupid questions like, are there any spirits here? Well, yes, there are. You've already seen in this situation that there are spirits here, and they're not very nice. You are setting up an open invitation to have negative spirits come through. That would be stupid. So what I first recommend that you do, and you will meet resistance, whether that is from your family members who may be freaked out by the idea, whether that is from family members who may be overtaken by the spirits and who wish to, prevent you from taking power into your own hands, or whether you may meet resistance from your own or perceived own, mind, which may just be the entities trying to influence you to dissuade you from taking power and matters into your own hands, then I do recommend that you keep on doing this. Start meditating. Meditation helps you relax, scientifically proven, by the way. It helps you relax, it helps you calm down, it helps you to expand your energy from a spiritual perspective, excuse me. It helps you to assert your energy in a very calm, collected, peaceful state. It helps you to regulate your energy, and it will require a lot of practice. And depending on the strength of the spirits that may be harassing you, you will want to put up protections, of course, you will want to put up wards and barriers, you will want to learn those kinds of things. And again, you will likely meet resistance. If the haunting that you are dealing with is too strong for a novice such as you, in this particular case, of course, if you are someone who is watching this and you're already a magician, A, why do you have a haunting in your house still? Why haven't you dealt with it unless you allow it to be there? And B, yeah, that should just not be the case at that point. And C, so I mean, if that isn't, excuse me, because, so what if, I mean, if that is the case, that it is too much, that the spirits are too violent, and you do not yet have that developed will, capacity, the tools necessary, the knowledge necessary, which is fine. Everybody starts somewhere. In no way, shape, or form. I mean, if that is the case, that it is too much, that the spirits are too violent, and you do not yet have that developed will, capacity, the tools necessary, the knowledge necessary, which is fine. Everybody starts somewhere. In no way, shape, or form trying to humiliate you if you, go that route and you fail. Practice makes perfect, as they say. And please do not needlessly endanger yourself if it turns out that you cannot handle the spirit. Because in some cases, it may be that the spirit is mostly just bluffing, it's lashing out, and it's just outwardly just trying to posture, if you will. But it can also be the case that the spirit is genuinely at that point in your life just too powerful for you. That is a possibility. And in that case, what I would recommend is that you leave, of course. Now, it is possible that the spirit may attach itself to you and then go with you, in which case you have no choice but to combat the situation, which is a situation that through past lives I have dealt with personally. I had a spirit attached to me that was at one point far more powerful than I was. It is fortunately no longer the case, of course, but yeah, there are circumstances sometimes which dictate that one must suffer their fair share of trials and evils, if you will, until the situation has been removed or dealt with in an adequate fashion. But anyway, to empower yourself would be highly recommended, and if you can't do it, get out. And if the thing is still there, then we are now dealing with a personal haunting, and that is what we will be moving on to next. So we then come to the last section of this video, which is the discussion of the signs and symptoms of a haunting of a person. So as I mentioned at the end of the last segment, what may happen is that a locationary haunting may turn into a personal haunting, where the individual um, gets, moves into a place and then picks up a spirit there who then, for whatever reason, decides that they want to follow this spirit, this person, excuse me, where the spirit wants to follow this person around. Now, this may happen for various reasons. It may happen that the individual is a very good food source. It may mean that the individual is someone that is like the spirit, which means that they will want to possess the individual. It may mean that the individual has just been unlucky and singled out as a prey for the individual to either feed off of or possess. It may be that the spirit has developed feelings for this particular individual, and yes, that is possible. And that may be the case with a human spirit, and that may be the case with a non-human spirit. So these are things that you may want to keep in mind, that if you do live in a haunted location, that you will want to take precautions, that you do not take spirits with you, especially if you have lived there for a longer time, and or if you feel that the spirit or spirits in question have taken a particular interest in you or someone that you love that lives with you in that house. So that is not to say, however, that a spirit necessarily has to be picked up in a haunted location. What could also just be the case is that you pick them up in a, I don't know, just walking down the street past a cemetery. It has actually happened to me where I helped out a friend by helping out their sibling, and this sibling had a couple of spirits in their house, and the female spirit in question, there was a male and a female. They were, I believe, a father and a daughter. Now, this daughter was a grown woman in life when she died. I think she was like in her 30s or something like that. And this particular female spirit developed what I would call an obsession with me, and actually decided that every time I came over there to help to do things in the house of the sibling of my friend, um, that she would decide to harass me, to talk to me, to do things to me, basically, not of a sexual nature, by the way, but more of a like a touchy, feely kind of way. And this is possible. However, the feeling I got from the spirit was that she was rather mentally unstable. And not only that, I already have my spirit spouse, if you will. So, and she would not tolerate another, well, spirit to come between that. Basically, what can happen is that a person can really just pick up spirits for whatever reason if they are not well enough protected. I mean, it is relatively rare because, like I said, most spirits do not have an interest in this kind of thing, and it is usually in specific locations where you will pick something like that up. And also, do keep something in mind. it takes a bit for someone to get the attention of most spirits, even if those spirits are not necessarily positive in nature. Just think about it. How many people go into and out of a graveyard during a given day to visit the graves of their, deceased loved ones? Quite a lot. And um, think on the fact that there are so many stories of negative spirits haunting graveyards. It is relatively rare, unless the individuals that go there disturb those spirits, even if the spirits that are there are negative, for them to follow the individual home. Usually they are followed home, the persons that is, uh, because they somehow disturbed the peace and order and sanctity of what these spirits see as their abodes, as their feeding ground, basically. Because they have a nice setup there. It's a graveyard, it's a cemetery, a lot of negative energy, a lot of grief, a lot of death. So these spirits linger around and they feed off of it, they grow strong off of it. So why would they normally, under normal circumstances, come with someone? So either they would do that to, teach you a lesson, or they would do that to, because you are someone who is perhaps without you knowing very gifted, and who may be a potential better source of food than the cemetery would, under normal circumstances, provide. Now, the signs and symptoms of a haunting of a person are very hard to tell sometimes. Why? Because, as I said earlier, they can often pass for mental illness. There is no, or very little, verification from others, initially at least, that there is indeed a supernatural phenomenon going on. Because what will often happen is what the symptoms that I discussed in the haunting of a property, those will usually happen, but they will happen much more focused on one particular individual. Now, if multiple people experience certain things, it is of course easier to compare stories and say, hey, we moved in here and this and that started happening the moment that we started moving in here or shortly after that. But if it's just one person and nobody else is receiving issues, then it is much more easy, of course, to say that, oh, this person is being mentally broken down by a spirit. No, maybe they're just depressed. It's hard to tell. It's really hard to tell, and that is, of course, where energetic, empathy and clairsentience and stuff like that comes in, because it is just hard to tell when someone is under attack from a malicious spirit if they are not receiving verification from any and all outside sources. Now, what you will usually see is that initially, especially, it is very subtle. The person will have like depressive thoughts. Their thoughts will be invaded. They will start having intrusive thoughts. They will start having, being told that they're depressed, and they will start slowly believing this because of subconscious suggestions and energy that is put into them. Because oftentimes such a person will have a low defense, a low resistance, or may even be a medium. They may even be a channeler, a shaman, who is, someone who is naturally open to receiving messages from spiritual realms. And such a spirit may, of course, abuse this if the person especially is not aware of these gifts that they have. And in this case, such a gift becomes a curse, at least until they start addressing it and remedying the situation in question. So basically, a person like that will get broken down over time, mentally first, and again physically later. They will start having weird health issues, and they will start showing very strange signs. Their personalities will change. You will notice that someone who, and keep in mind, I myself am a natural introvert. I recharge by taking time away from people, and I'm a pretty big introvert on top of that. I do need human interaction from time to time, but overall, I don't really like being around, a multitude of people for prolonged periods of time, and that is natural. I think that, one third of the world population, I think I've heard in my studies, is an introvert to various degrees. This person, if they are normally, just a normal introvert, and they will just, be around people from time to time. They will still talk to their friends, and they will still, just hang out every other week or something like that. Or they will, talk over the internet in our modern generation. And stuff like that. But a person will under attack. If they're under attack, a person will often become extremely introverted. They will start chasing away people that they love. They will start picking fights with people. They will likely start having a fascination with morbid stuff. They will, uh, although that is not necessarily the result of spirit, but I am, of course, going here on the premise that a person was not prior to that like this. And we are also going to have to take into account that if a person leaves, for example, a religion, that they suppressed certain things about themselves, perhaps that, such as perhaps a morbid curiosity with the darker things in life if they grew up to be a Christian where they were told that that's not, allowed. And if a person then leaves Christianity and then turns goth or something, in a very stereotypical example, um, that does not necessarily have to indicate oppression or possession. That does, however, it is, however, something that a close friend would be able to tell, because a close friend would likely know the struggles of individuals and what they go through on a mental level and a physical level, and what they like and what they don't like, despite and in spite of religious prohibitions and societal constraints and norms and stuff like that. But what you will often see is a genuine change of character, whether that is temporary or permanent, is dependent on the case and on the severity of this particular spirit attack. So a person will start developing strange, for them, strange curiosities and strange, interests, and very morbid, perhaps. They will become perhaps suicidal, depressed, for prolonged periods of time. They will start to act completely different one moment and completely different the next. They basically may appear to, at certain points, be two different people. Um, it may even be the case that if a person who is, for example, male, if they are under attack from a female spirit, they may start exhibiting traits that are more stereotypically feminine, where if that person is traditionally masculine in their expressions normally, where that will provide a very clear counter contrast, or vice versa, of course. If a very feminine woman is suddenly starting to exhibit very you know, domineering, masculine, bossy behavior. And of course, these are very traditional, gender norms that I'm quoting here, but it is just to provide you an example. It is basically the point that I'm trying to make is that a person will act outside of how they normally act. They are acting in a way that is normally, as I said earlier, ego dystonic to how you, as someone who knows this person, would normally act. So they will do that, and oftentimes what you will see is, yes, they will develop an interest in the occult. They will start developing an interest in the darker side of the occult specifically. Now, in and of itself, this is not necessarily a bad thing. I actually would like to present an alternative theory here rather than the devil or demons. Um, I have two theories and two possible scenarios that I would like you to think about. Every person has intuition. Every person has, whether they realize it or not, extrasensory gifts, energetic perception, if you will. And that is likely to say that in such a case, a person may feel that they are under attack, whether they realize it consciously or not. They may subconsciously realize it. On a spiritual level, they may realize it, and therefore may feel an instinctive pull to the metaphysical in order to seek a cure. And that is often the case with shamans, as I have undergone myself, where I felt all my life, despite the fact that I was a Christian, that I was tormented by things and that I felt a call to engage with the metaphysical. They call it the shamanic calling. And basically, the drive became so strong at a certain point that I said goodbye to my religion and that I just started delving into the metaphysical. And what happened then is that I started receiving a lot of resistance, even from the people who were supposed to help me with it. And yeah, there just was a lot of nastiness that ensued. And eventually, I overcame the odds and overcame the struggles, and I am where I am now. But this may be a call from the subconscious to engage in what will ultimately be their salvation, which is to say, they themselves through the utilization of will. Because at the end of the day, if one is tormented by a spirit, there is nobody who is going to be a better weapon against it than you yourself. Because there are minds fighting in conflict with one another in this particular scenario. And in most cases, the spirits that is discarnate will win because the person who is under attack is already, for whatever reason, weakened. That's not to say that they are weak. That is to say that they are at that point in time in which they are attacked are weakened. They are vulnerable and they are likely someone who may have gifts, powers. Everybody has gifts. But people who have a strong disposition towards certain things may be perceived by spirits as someone who is a ripe feeding ground, if you will. Very strange analogy, perhaps, but they will be perceived as being very fertile ground to generate a lot of energy from, negative energy in this case. So, and especially if someone already has an interest in the occult, this may, of course, be turned around because a person may feel drawn to the metaphysical, to the occult, in order to perhaps subconsciously want to remedy this themselves in order to want to know what the hell's going on with them, as was the case with me. However, fortunately, I personally was never stupid enough to take the word of any given spirits for a prolonged period of time after I found out that they were telling me nonsense, because this does happen. Spirits do tell you nonsense, and they may do this to misguide you. They may do this to, fool you, to deceive you. And just because it is a spirit does not mean it's going to tell you the truth. Most spirits are not obligated to tell you the truth any more than most people are that are currently incarnated. So this is something that you will have to keep in mind if you do go that route. And I do recommend that with prudence, care, and caution that you do that. However, this spirit may also want to draw them, and this is kind of a gamble for them, which is the second option that I was talking about. That they will want to have you engage in the occult, but to the end of opening perhaps portals through rituals or for doing stupid shit like asking Ouija boards dumb questions that you should not be asking if you don't know what you're doing, or that you should just not be asking, period, because the question itself is stupid for various reasons. Where you just open portals to other, cronies or buddies or henchmen of the spirit that's already terrorizing you. And in that case, you will be even deeper into the shit than you would have been had you not done that. So, what I would recommend is that if you do indeed have someone like that in your life and you do strongly suspect that they are oppressed or partially possessed or maybe even possessed entirely, that you help them to develop themselves, that you find them perhaps a teacher that is willing to teach them magic, a reliable teacher that is willing to help them explore what is wrong with them and then to combat them. And this needs to be someone that you know you can trust, of course, because in my own case, my own teacher that I had did not turn out to be so very trustworthy in the end, but that is a very long story that I talk about in my runic initiation videos, which are titled the Elder Fufart Divination 101 series. So if you have an interest in that, you might want to, you know, watch through all of these, although it is not until the second half of the initiation that this is coming to light. So it is very interesting that people may feel this calling and that these spirits will try to perhaps manipulate it to their own advantage, as spirits and people are prone to doing, of course. So that is something to keep in mind. A curiosity towards the occult, towards the metaphysical. This is, of course, for most of you, probably a very different viewpoint than what you are taught in our Judeo-Christian society as it is, where it is the call of Satan, where it is Satan trying to tempt you to negotiate with demons. That's not my take on it as a pagan. My take on it is someone genuinely trying to find a cure, whether they themselves realize it or not. It is a calling from their spirit to shamanize or to answer their ancestral hereditary calling as a witch, or to become or to take on their role as medium, as whatever else have you, perhaps to engage in ceremonial magic, to do all these sorts of different things. And that is something that, of course, can be potentially very dangerous, and it can potentially, just like a kitchen knife, which can be used to, slice bread, but it can also be used to stab someone. If you have a steak knife, you can, eat steak with it. No harm done. It's used for the tools that it's used for. It's used for the purpose that it's used for. Excuse me. Or you can stab someone's eyes out with it. It's possible that you can do both with it, but that doesn't make the tool in and of itself evil. It's just how you use it. It's how stupid or how smart you are when you utilize it. It's like a gun. Do you use it for self-defense, or do you use it to go out and shoot people up? It's same tool, different intentions, different methods, different approaches. It's not the gun's fault. It's the person's fault. So that is something that you do have to keep in mind. So what I would recommend is that you, if they do, engage in such rituals, if you find someone who is perhaps engaging with the occult and you suspect that they are under the influence of something, A, do trust your instinct. Perhaps they are under the influence of something. But B, do not necessarily disempower them from finding their own power, but sit down, talk with them about it. What kind of rituals are you doing? Why are you doing them? To who are you doing them? With who are you doing them? For what reason? What is the purpose of it? And are you trying to contact the devil or something like that? Are you trying to you know trying to contact your ancestors? Or are you trying to talk to helpful spirits? And the spirits who are helpful, what are they saying to you? Or at least the spirits that perceive or are portraying themselves to be helpful, what are they telling you to try to be helpful? Does it make sense to you? Does it feel good to you? Does what they say make logical sense to you as the listener of what they have to tell you? So there is a lot of caution that needs to be taken there, of course, if you want to address that. And it is, yes, there is a cause for concern there, because if a person is already in that vulnerable kind of a mindset, then there is, of course, certainly a reason to be concerned that they may be dabbling and engaging with the kinds of beings that are just out to harm them. And that is nowhere near all spirits. In fact, I'd argue that most spirits have no interest in interacting with us because they have their own business to take care of. But yeah, on the other hand, it may also be the case that the spirit in question may want to keep the person away from the metaphysical. They want to keep the person away from the occult. And why would they want to do that? To disempower them, to make sure that they do not find the knowledge that they seek to get rid of them, of the spirits that is harming them. So they may utilize old religious fears to influence the mind of that particular individual to stay away. That's the case with me for a long, long time. It may seek to, frighten the individual into submission with tales of demons and other negative entities, and it may even portray itself through the tools used of divination, such as the Ouija board, such as tarot cards. And yes, just because you use tarot cards, I mean, cards are cards; they're tools. They're not divinely protected by right of them being tarot cards. If you have a negative entity around you, it can influence your divination tools if you don't take the proper protection, the proper defensive measures against such beings. So, these are all things that you need to keep in mind. But other than that, the person may experience, sleep deprivation. It may be kept up at night. They may be, haunted in their dreams. They may be attacked in their dreams. They may wake up with scratches, cuts, bruises, bite marks, etc., etc. They may hear voices. Their windows may be knocked on. They may, endure a lot of weird, strange phenomena, and exceptional bad luck is another one of those things that a negative spirit haunting an individual may cause. They may cause isolation, the feeling of isolation, because the mind is a powerful tool, of course. And if a spirit can influence someone to believe that they are isolated, then they have already won half the battle, because then they will not seek help, and then it's just them versus the spirit. And if the person is already vulnerable enough to be attacked and oppressed in such a manner, then it is likely that the spirit will win without help. So these are things that I would like you to be cautious about. And certainly, if you catch them, wanting to self-harm, if you catch them to have suicidal ideation or something along those lines, those are all surefire ways to know that, combined with everything else that I have mentioned, by the way, to know that this individual is indeed oppressed or haunted. Now, to get on the topic of other people experiencing manifestations of a person being haunted, it is very much possible. I have experienced this myself. I have experienced this with others. My sister, when I was enduring my trials in this regard, got touched, got prodded, got told to get the fuck out. She saw the manifestation of someone who was haunting me outside the house, looking into the window of the room where I was sitting. When she was looking outside of the window, she looked away for a second. That person was no longer there. Um, and things like that. Other people may, especially once the entity has become strong enough and confident enough, may start experiencing, the closer they get or the more they try to help the person in question, they may start to experience external active manifestations of the spirit as well. This is possible. And certainly, the more that you try to intervene, the more that you try to help the person, the more that you will get attacked and the more that you will get exposed to phenomena such as this. And I would like to offer a word of caution. The spirit will try to break you off them, off of the individual that you are trying to help. They will try to drive you two apart. So that is something to be cautious of. And they will do so often viciously. If they can help it, however, they will do so very, very subtly so as to not alarm the person trying to help the individual that there is, that there is indeed a spiritual component to all these issues. However, with that said, if a person is indeed, having severe depression, suicidal ideation, etc., do please contact a mental health professional or physician, whoever you need to go to get a referral to a trained licensed counselor, professional psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever. Because you know these things are serious. They are very dangerous. I have been through all such things, depression, being under attack from these entities, and it can be very life-threatening. So just because the cause may, in this case, be spiritual, does not mean that there is no need for physical or mental health care. That is the damage that they're doing, and that damage needs to be treated appropriately or at least controlled while you work on the, the spiritual component of things, if there is indeed a spiritual component, and if that spiritual component especially is the root cause of it. So, of course, like I mentioned earlier, you see a lot of, rapid changing of moods, of behaviors, etc., etc. Now, all these things could, of course, be caused by physical occurrences that affect the mental health of individuals. Someone may get raped. Of course, they're going to have emotional traumas. Of course, they're going to have mental health issues. Of course, they're going to exhibit very strange behavior to the point where it can even seem like they're not the same person anymore. They may have been violently beaten up. They may have undergone some other sort of, strange, nasty, evil occurrence. Maybe their house got robbed and they're now paranoid with burglaries and stuff like that. These things are all, of course, normal, natural reactions to, such violations of the person and or of your property. So it is not necessarily the case that the person who exhibits these traits is, of course, under spiritual attack. Let that be very clear here. However, there are, as I said, many signs to watch out for. A person who is under spiritual attack and who is having claws, claw marks, and bite marks, and scratches and stuff, all over them, and they obviously did not do it themselves, such as, for example, is on their back or something like that. These are all clear hallmarks that they are under, spiritual attack, and this, in that case, is easily and readily identifiable as such. So use prudence, use caution, use critical thinking, analyze the situation before you rapidly decide to jump in and draw conclusions. So yeah, that is really all I have to say on this topic for now. In another video very soon, I will be uploading information on how to combat such spiritual attacks, hauntings, etc., and what you can do to prevent such things. But for now, I am going to leave this video, and yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and I appreciate your views, of course. Please like, comment, subscribe if you found these points interesting, if you found this video helpful, which I certainly hope you do. A lot of work was, as you can hopefully tell, put into this video. It's a very passionate topic of mine, as I said in the beginning. It's something that is near and dear to my heart, and something that I just find great, well, fun, I guess, to talk about. For me, it's currently now fun because I find it fascinating. Things that are fascinating are fun to me, not necessarily for the reasons that most people would think of as fun, but regardless, I hope you understand what I'm saying. So, yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and I will hopefully catch you in the next video. Yeah.